We'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Would you like to take the roll call, please? Here. Thank you. If you'll join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. If you'll join me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item 2 is the citizens' comment period. We have one gentleman out in the period. We have one gentleman out in the audience. You're not bringing us a pot of money for budgetary purposes for 20. Good to see you, Paul. Anyone else? Seeing no one else, I'll go ahead and close the comment period, and we'll. I'll go ahead and close the comment period, and we'll move on to item 3, which is, I think, a continuum of last week's activities relative to looking at, analyzing, reviewing, et cetera, the mayor's proposed and recommended 2023 budget. And I think we're going to spend some time on capital funds this evening.
That is correct. Before we get started, if we could just do a couple housekeeping, you do have some replacement pages at your desk. I'm just going to start with the top that says hard to read because of the way the ledger pages works, but the first 3 pages are pages 35 to 37. Those are sewer detail pages. Sewer summary pages, and these will all go on the website first thing tomorrow morning. And those are sewer summary. We were just doing some updates on the sewer budget. You did have those pages. We just updated those.
So they should be replaced then. 35, 36, and 37.
And the next 3 are related. They're essentially the same, only the detail pages for sanitary sewer, 2, 11, 12, and 13.
11, 12, and 13.
Correct. We'll get all the pages changed, and then we'll just give you a rundown of what that looks like.
Then it looks like 224
224 and 225. That is an update to the health grants. All the revenues were in the department, so there really wouldn't be any changes on those other than just adding those to the list. Through 280, and the details on that those are some updates on the utility improvement fund, the development fund, as we had discussed at both the council presentation and the first meeting now. Fund 22, Fund 27. And 299 at the tail end of the debt schedules is a very small update for Fund 51. that are the health insurance fund budget. That's pages 323 through 325. This is an add. 323 through 325. This is an add. There was only a header sheet in there. This is still being worked on with personnel. It will be presented to personnel on Monday night, council on Tuesday night in regard to the benefit choices for next year, but those can be added as 220 choices for next year, but those can be added as 323, 24, and 25.
What pages were at?
That would be 323, 324, and 325.
End of the book.
It should be at the very last pages. It ended at page 3, last pages. It ended at page 322.
Got it.
And like I said, we will be talking about all of those. You have two other things at your desk. Those are really just discussion points. One of them is just a draft packet of some TID analysis. Finance Committee, as they should be, very impactful on the city, uses a lot of city resources while the TIDs are going on. We'll talk about those in detail, and then we just have a little one-page debt analysis that was included in the council presentation, but I thought you would be interested.
All right, thank you for that.
So with that said, there are some adjustments on those. We'll talk about development and utility improvement as we go through the capital, but maybe Denise, if you just want to start with the sanitary sewer updates, because what we'll do is, as you recall from prior years, and so it'll tell, what's the fund, what are the account numbers, what they were and what they are, so they'll get that list, and then they'll just have a reason for the list. And the reason for the sanitary sewer one is they were just simply updated, and Denise can walk us through those changes right now. So you are on page...
if you go to page 35. When I had completed when I first looked at the sanitary sewer fund, the clean water fund loan, I had not gone back and put in the interest income, which is line 614712, so that needed to be added into the income section. And then there's also a line for the expense. It's basically an offset. We have it's a pass-through, so to speak, with the Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewer District. So we get charged Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewer District. So we get charged interest, and they pay us back for that interest. $318,796.
Thank you, 319, okay.
Yep. And then let's see. I also took a look at the capital contributions at the time that this was put together. We hadn't spent a lot of time, or didn't have an opportunity to look at what the capital contributions would be. So there's an estimate in there for that now, as well as for both the city and for via the TIDs, for sewer projects. Then the other section that was reviewed was the facility charges, which is on page 36. And that's, some of those were there, but like depreciation and the city support for engineering and admin, those items were reviewed and entered.
Would you just make a note that Joe is joining us? Thank you. You were saying, Denise?
So for the sanitary sewer fund, we took a look at the facilities charges, some of the items that are either allocations or charged from other city departments, and those were updated as 3-1 on page 36, 5541 through 5572. Those were updated. And then, as I mentioned, the interest on the clean water fund loan is shown at the bottom of that page, 731, 5621, interest expense. So yeah, it was basically an additional review of the sanitary sewer budget.
right. Any questions, comments there? Everybody has that, page 35 and 36, updates?
11 and to 213, because those are the same exact changes. But the next one you have 224 and 225.
Is it? Replacing pages. Follow along. They're just giving us an update on these now, so if you haven't put them in, they'll be, okay, I'm sorry, 224
224 and 225, those would be the health grants. As I mentioned, there are no technical changes on them. The numbers are all the same. It was there are no technical changes on them. The numbers are all the same. It was just that everything in the department request needed to be copied over to the mayor's recommended.
So the total grants of 723, that's being so the total grants of 723, that's being estimated remains the same.
Correct.
And
You will notice that on this fund, if you go to that page 225, you will notice that the revenues are quite a bit larger than the expenditures. We're working through our health director, a bit larger than the expenditures. We're working through our health director. She was able to join us last time, but she's off on leave right now. She'll be back in beginning of November. So she knew she didn't have expenditures. She just took over as health director like 2 weeks before she went on leave. So she's going to be working on that. Those were weeks before she went on leave. So she's going to be working on that. Those will likely be a council budget amendment by the time she gets around to do it.
okay,
So she would only have authority through this budget if it's approved for the revenues listed on here and the expenditures listed on here.
questions there, anyone? So this will be revised as we move along.
And the next one, if you can go to page this as the Fund 22, the Utility Improvement Fund. Very small activity happening in here. A lot of the charges that happen, so extensions, those kind of things. We have often in history used these as placeholders. You'll see for 2022 budget, there was a sewer connection placeholder of $500,000. We're not expecting to do that this year. So again, the projected activity would be zero. However, we do have one planned for next year, so that'll be considered. The development fund, if you look in that $1,191,000, that is related to the water tower project that's going on. We did put it as a projected 2022. We're under the impression as we sit here today that project is going to go forward and be bid out yet this year, so all those funds will happen. So if that doesn't then happen, those projected 22s would just get carried over to 2023. Can you turn your mic on?
Oh, sorry.
And feel free, if you want to, as long as we're not getting a lot of feedback, feel free to just leave your mics on. And then if we get feedback, we can, usually it's if we turn every other one off.
$1,000. Is that the sewer extension that we were discussing around 92nd and Ryan Road, that one?
Exactly.
Okay,
Yep.
I just wanted to be sure there wasn't
Yep.
a different one that I wasn't
And
remembering.
it is listed in the capital, as we go through
Yep.
the capital fund 46,
Okay.
you're gonna see it listed on that sheet as well. 277, there were no updates, that's just part of the intro, but we did add the project list on page 278. And this project list comes exactly from the capital budget. Just gonna get you the page number. We're gonna be talking about it in detail, but on 250, in regard to any impact fees is listed there. In addition to that, we'll get into a lot more details on the capital, but those now match. And the 256 was already in the budget, so this was just a bit of catch up on that. And then we did add estimates for all of the impact fee. We've been spending a lot of time with some of the big ones. We have HSA Commercial Real Estate is building a $71,000 square foot flex building out in the corporate park down in the southeast portion of the community. have Saputo just to the east of there, building a very large cheese repackaging plant. The Season, 27th, just up the road from there, very large multifamily units. We have, let's see, trying to think of some of the big ones. We have some stuff going on, Rise Development going on in TID 6. Oh, thank you, yep. We have a hotel, 6. Oh, thank you, yep. We have a hotel going in TID 5, a sleep-in / mainstay. We'll talk about these when we get to the TID. They do have a second hotel proposed in that TID. Council's been hearing some of this, so some of the council members already know that. And then there was just, council members already know that. And then there was just on last Tuesday, on October 4th, there was a presentation from the Ballpark Commons developers partnering with Mandel to do a very large project, Orchard View Shopping Center, the Loomis Road off-ramp, and then the M1 building. So we'll talk about all of the Loomis Road off-ramp and then the M1 building. So we'll talk about all of those when we get to the TIDs, but looks like a pretty big thing going on. The only ones we don't expect to get going in the really near future, we think the second hotel, the Pennant Hotel, is probably gonna be a little bit slower than the rest, and then those last three pieces, the Public Square, the rest, and then those last three pieces, the Public Square, which is Orchard View, M1, and what they're calling the Retreat on the list, we think are next year, but all the other ones we're expecting to get going this year, so big projects like that obviously bring in big impact fees. So there's that, and then as well, again, on page 256 in the budget on the capital, you'll see all the impact fee spending, and this just documents it in the fund. So that is that. And then that is that. And then again, the Special Assessments Fund, Fund 51, it's on page 299, sits behind debt, very small activities going on in that fund. And then I think I'm going to save health insurance until we get to the self-insurance fund, if it's okay. With that said, if there's any questions, we're happy to answer those at this point. Otherwise, there's any questions, we're happy to answer those at this point. Otherwise, what we'd like to do is start with the capital improvement fund, that we do have generally 6 capital funds. Capital outlay, which is our smaller capital type items, not technically a building or, a big project, it's usually a single purchase. A building or, a big project, it's usually a single purchase. That's what happens in Fund 41. Equipment replacement, that's Fund 42. That is a schedule that council basically has approved of equipment that's what we want to say on the record, and as we buy it, we replace it. We'll talk about that. Capital improvement and water towers, new water connections, public works facilities, trails, parks, those kind of things happen in Fund 46. Fund 47 is our street improvement fund, and then we have the utility development and the development and impact fee development fund that we talked about so far. So if we want page 226 is where the capital improvement fund starts. There's a couple summary pages, perhaps just for maybe a bit of a bird's eye view of, where, what are all the projects recommended. There are some very large 11.5 by 17 pages, and it's on 230.
30.
So again, you've seen this last year. This is the second year for the capital. There are a lot of projects. There's a lot of pent-up needs. We really have not been doing a lot with capital improvements, facility-type projects for a number of years. You're going to see that here. So it all becomes, what are the city's priorities at the time? So you'll see over in the right-hand column in the right-hand section of those big pages that says mayor's recommended. And so basically the departments requested all of those, and then the mayor, basically the ones that said 0 are the ones that he is not recommending. Department heads, they don't love it, right? Because they want a lot of these projects done, but they understand. I think there's a good balance, as you see from the summary page. There's a lot of needs in every department, and there's basically projects for all the departments in there. So I think at this point, maybe Denise, you wanna start?
Sure, and Peggy pointed out, but those large, the fold-out pages, it's also nice because you can see, like she said, you know, maybe somebody asked for the 1-ton dump truck, but the mayor recommended is 0. So it was requested, but we did not include it in the budget. In the columns, right before that, the funding sources. So if there is a project that, you know, somebody's requested, it may be borrowing, it may come out of, you know, the capital fund, it might come out of the replacement fund, or there might be a grant that's gonna pay for it. So that's the section in the middle there that sort of. So if we just talk through 141. So I'm gonna flip forward to page 242. And this is just, again, we're talking about the capital outlay fund. There's going to be some landfill siting revenue of about $700,000, and there's grants and donations of about $248,000, and then a small amount of interest on the fund balance. The departments requested $3.4 million of new projects, and we are funding $925,000 of those. There's $239,000 for police vehicles. There's a replacement of an exhaust capture system for the 3 fire stations. And then there's some IT equipment, servers and such, and then an $80,000 IT equipment, servers and such, and then an $80,000 sort of the beginnings of or part of the comprehensive outdoor recreation and master plan rewrite.
How many vehicles, police vehicles?
That's a great question.
I believe it's 4.
I believe it's
Yeah.
4, right.
That's a great question.
I believe it's 4.
I believe it's
Yeah.
4, right. And so it's an
Yep.
interesting point on those police vehicles because it's about $290,000. And the interesting thing is those cars used to cost approximately $25,000 to $30,000, low 30s. Now with the bulletproof sheet, I think we talked about this at the
Yeah.
first meeting with the chief. Now with the bulletproof sheet, I think we talked about this at the
Yeah.
first meeting with the chief. But the bulletproof shields and the armor on the doors and different things, some extra safety precautions, we're right around 80 a vehicle.
If there is a possibility of building a new fire station, do we need to is a possibility of building a new fire station, do we need to, is it recommended we do the various servers and exhaust source at all 3 stations?
So we're prioritizing the projects at both DPW and fire right now just because of those possibilities. The items that were included in the 2023 budget are the ones that they can't live without. So fire station is a little bit different than DPW in that they're in those buildings 24/7, so they basically live there. So there was a concerted effort from all of the department heads to say, you know, are those things that we can do without, or perhaps just kick down the road a little bit. But we got into a situation with a couple fire stations where they've got some pretty major things going on, and we can't really not do it. But the good news is, we talked a little bit, I think, Chair, you asked about what's gonna happen with Fire Station 2 if we indeed vacate that. And there's a chance that it could be used for another purpose or be sold, but either way, we don't think anything we're doing improvement-wise is going to be money wasted at that point.
Thank you.
And it is funded,
It's going to be money wasted at that point.
Thank you.
and it is funded substantially through a grant, so it's a small
Okay.
portion.
Thank you.
That will be in the budget.
Similarly, although this is DPW, I recall something in around 20 grand for fuel.
Ed, you want to turn on your mic, please?
Around 20,000 for the fuel island.
Yep.
How would the potential of the new building impact that?
That is definitely needed, and it will be movable to where it needs to be on the new site. So yes, we talked, it makes sense to delay it, and they just basically said we can't because we'd have to stop using those fuel islands, but they will all be movable because the fuel islands likely would not be in the same place. even if just fire comes there, but all of the cost involved, the vast majority of it would be preserved.
Yeah, what it would cost to move it at the appropriate time? I mean, I guess what I'm getting at is, would it make sense to put them where they potentially would be?
I think there's enough question. The discussion we had with the department heads and the mayor was there's enough question about what that timing might look like. Combine, do the DPW and fire right now, we'd be in the 30 million range. And that's probably not something that the city's willing to take on at this point. So by the time the fuel stations would be ready to be moved, it would be a number of years down the road for the one that they're moving. And they already did the other one, 2 last year. Check that out.
And those islands, if I recall, are used by all departments, correct?
That is true, and it's all the departments, the school district, that kind of thing.
So there's a lot of activity and volume that goes through there. Just for my clarification, that location for that is not the exact corner of 76th and Rawson, correct? It's adjacent to or across the street from the Wazilla building? Am I accurate on that, or are we?
I'm not sure what you mean by the Wazilla building. So you know where the DPW facility is right now?
Yeah.
The fire station would, and that's right where the fire station would be, right on that corner. And then the DPW would be some kind of a makeup of the existing buildings, and then
South.
we own all the way back to those ball fields. In fact, the storage facility that's being referred to, that would basically replace those 2 older storage buildings that they are using, and that would be in the backside of we would do and not have to completely rebuild the DPW facility. So the phasing also kind of helps it from that perspective.
Right. I guess my question is, there's a house that sits on the corner right now, adjacent, directly east of, at street level, Ryan Road. Am I correct that is? So it's just west of there. Now it's Zern Building Products, I think, across the street, but so down that whatever street that services the ballparks. That's what I thought. I just wanted to in my mind make sure I had that accurate. Yeah, I think that project, obviously councils, that's gonna be a big one, but I think that one may have some phases to it where, you say, well, is there cost savings if you can do the whole project at once? And, yeah, maybe, but it may be a pretty big bite to take off and chew and handle in one fell swoop. Plus, if you have 2 major departments trying to relocate, rearrange, whatever, that's a fair amount of turmoil on their part as all. That's a fair amount of turmoil on their part as all. Plus, if they're all kind of in the same area, there may be some efficiencies to trying to phase in the retrofitting and moving and rearranging and moving and rearranging and so on and so on and so on. But anyway, I guess time will tell on that.
Right. And the existing DPW facility is only 25 years old. And I say only because that's fairly new for a city building. So there's just been a lot of questions. We've gotten some questions from the city building. So there's just been a lot of questions. We've gotten some questions from the community. We've had some questions from council members. I think what we've heard so far, and we'll see if it makes it through this budget process, but one of the top priorities is that fire station relocation, just because of everything that's going on in the southwest portion of the city. And, with the 100 southwest portion of the city, and, with the 138 unit Newman, we have 33 condos that Bear's doing, Ryan Meadows, so there's a lot going up there. And the fire chief will tell you, I think he probably did tell you, he can't sleep at night because he doesn't like how far that stuff is away from.
And then they will keep in the back burner the dialogue with, how do I want to say this, but the potential sharing of services.
Absolutely.
In the equation, or at least to make sure that we're not sidestepping if that.
Correct, and that's really kind of another strategic play on the whole design of everything that's going on. And those discussions are ongoing. We we have an older resolution, it's a number of years old. Basically, it was the council giving permission to talk about service sharing and what does that look like? Is that station sharing? Is that equipment sharing? It's interesting, the fire chief was just at a meeting with us this morning talking about that very topic, and he just said, he was at a chief's meeting this past week, and that was the discussion was, you know, we're growing. He's been doing pretty okay with firefighters and staffing. You know, we have the extra firefighter in this budget, but he's not hearing the same from his peers. So he feels like this is perhaps he thinks that's gonna go faster than slower just because of all the challenges everybody's having right now in the budget.
This may be off topic, and if so, just let me know. I actually had a constituent reach out to me today. He is a deputy fire chief on Brookfield's department, but lives in my district. And his concern with the budget is that we're going to be, if we combine departments, or that we're using our resources now when we do mutual aid calls for Greenfield, because Greenfield's out helping Milwaukee, as an example. I mean, that may be a better question for the chief, but it was just
that's
a
a really
question
good
that I
question.
wasn't really sure how to answer for him at this time.
It's a good question. Brookfield is in Waukesha County, so they're not part of the Milwaukee County.
Right.
Good question. Brookfield is in Waukesha County, so they're not part of the Milwaukee County
Right.
sharing, but we
But
have
he's concerned
automatic
Franklin.
mutual aid. And I will tell you, the chief will tell you, we keep track of it. We get it, you see it all in the newsletter that you get from the chief every week. And we talk about how many did we give and how many did we receive. And it just depends on the community, how many did we receive. And it just depends on the community. To some communities, like Hills Corners, we're a net giver. To somebody like Greendale, we're actually a net receiver just because of everything we have going on. We're hoping this relocated station will help us serve our community. And as the mayor says, and the council says regularly, as the mayor says and the council says regularly, our number one priority is our community. We'll help when we can, you know, and that's the way it is. But I can tell you, especially with the fire chiefs, just because they're a little bit more transient than some of the other services, it doesn't matter what vehicle, what apparatus shows up at your house. It doesn't matter what vehicle, what apparatus shows up at your house, you would be served, and you would be served well. Milwaukee County has a really high standard of care, so the chief is comfortable with that. He's getting much more comfortable with all these changes that have been being made, and we can certainly bring him back to talk to you again if you know this as we go forward.
We will, okay, because I may have phrased that wrong too. I think my constituent was concerned that we're like helping out, just as an example, Greenfield, Hills Corners, because they're sending like to help Milwaukee, the city of Milwaukee, because the city of Milwaukee, I understand, is in dire need of fire
Certainly a
service
point of discussion in the
in the
county.
future.
Added point there too is when you look at some of these potential names that are talked about, the growth area left in Milwaukee County is Oak Creek and Franklin. So we're gonna need more firefighters or more equipment or whatever. Some of the other communities may be more at a stabilized or fully equipment and facilities and say, well, we're saturated, we're good, or with major tweaks. So you've got kind of all of this balancing going on, and how do you allocate that at cost? Is it by population or by something else, or so there's a lot of variables going on, but there's potential for dialogue and discussion, and see what potential may exist. Because at the end of the day, I think, as you just pointed out, they're all kind of doing the same thing at the same time. And if there's 5 come in at one time, themselves independently, but you want available 5 units to be able to go out and hit the road if that's what's necessary.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I will tell you, there's one community, Greenfield happens to be a community right now, that's really pressing the whole mutual aid formula, because they are a net giver to a lot of communities, whether it be Milwaukee, Greendale, et cetera, and to a lot of communities, whether it be Milwaukee, Greendale, et cetera. And mutual aid is, I hate to say this word, but free, right? It's just back and forth. They have an agreement. There's no money changing hands or any of those kind of things. But I do know that all of the jurisdictions keep track of all their mutual aid. How much do they give and how much do they receive? So I'm guessing mutual aid, how much do they give and how much do they receive? So I'm guessing with the ICC communities, all the Milwaukee County communities, that's definitely going to be a point of discussion. Up in the valley, they already have a cost sharing involved with their mutual aid. It kind of deters, maybe you're Milwaukee from cutting a station, and maybe you're Milwaukee from cutting a station and knowing that its neighbors are going to help and things like that. So my guess is sometime on the horizon that's going to be
We have a question here. Go ahead, Elmer.
Thank you. And still in Fund 41.
Go ahead, Elmer.
Thank you. And still in Fund 41, I just want some clarification, particularly in parks, line 5832. $175,000 was requested, and as I go to 248, because, and just kind of knowing previous discussions, that was requested for the replacement of Kayla's playground flooring. So that was what was requested. The mayor recommends 40,000. I'm not sure why.
So that's actually multiple, yep.
So Kayla's playground is actually in 46. So in Fund 41, there were a number of other items that
Okay.
were, various, park improvements, park equipment. So if we looked at the bottom of page 2, they asked for park equipment replacement, and there was, some funds given for that, for Fund 41. There was a request for a baseball field grooming machine, that was a 0. So it's a lot of
Okay.
different, smaller things. The 40,000 that you see is that complete play structure.
Gotcha.
And my one park.
For the year
Okay.
2023.
Correct. So the pages, the budget pages from the system, those are good, but I feel like this is a bit stronger.
Okay.
Because it will tell you it'll tell you all the requests entered in, and then what the request is, and then over to the right, in the far right section, 5 columns in from the left, or the right, it'll tell you what was actually approved and what was advanced to another year. So it just gives you a bit more of a snapshot on that.
And I knew that flooring was not going to be funded for 2023, so that's.
So there were a lot of conversation. It's a very popular park, a lot going on there. But the indication we got from DPW staff was that they work really hard to maintain it, but they're doing a good job and they can do it for another year. But we're probably not gonna hear that again. I would expect that you might see it in next year's budget because we've asked them to defer twice.
$75,000, so not a small ticket
No,
item.
it's not. And I do know the city engineer is exploring less expensive alternatives for that flooring, but that's tricky.
Area of Fund 41, I was just gonna sort of wrap it up. By looking at that page that you were looking at, Alderwoman Hanneman, if you look at page 245, I guess it is, no, 244, you can see that basically we have funded about $950,000 and we have $1,000. So we are utilizing grants and impact fees, site fee, landfill siting, to pay for those projects. So there won't be a depletion of fund balance for Fund 41.
So before we get to 42, maybe I can just talk in general about all the capital. There's a lot of discussion on how much we usually spend. We usually spend anywhere from $1 million to 1.4-ish on capital outlay. That's down this year. Capital equipment replacement is down this year because that doesn't have a lot of high priority. It certainly has replacement, but doesn't have a lot of highest priority. It certainly has replacement, but doesn't have a lot of highest priority items. So the next 2 years are light. You're going to see when you hit Fund 46 a lot more than you're used to seeing in there, and you're going to see a lot in Fund 47. You've heard the city engineer talk about this many times. The street replacement fund. We were for many years putting $1 million in there. For 2023, we have 1.5 million. So that 500,000 had to come from somewhere. It's just a readjustment of all those capital funds essentially. And then, like I said, in Fund 46, you'll see that extra borrowing.
And for the fire department, the building improvements for, I see, but the mayor recommended budget for building improvements is 243.7.
So that would be the design for that fire station.
For the new one.
Yep,
Okay,
that would
that's
happen in
included in
20.
that.
Would be the design for that fire station.
For the new
So,
one.
Yep,
Okay,
that would
that's
happen in
included in that.
'23, and, you know, of course, with approval. Usually what happens is these kind of big projects get approved in the budget, and then they also have to have a direct approval from the council. So usually there's 2 approvals on those.
Thank you.
So I'm not sure if it would be simpler for me to just walk through this sheet, or would you prefer, I mean, for Fund 42, the replacement fund, there wasn't a lot of activity. There's one item being replaced, and that is the ambulance. The rest of the, basically not, we do not have anything else in Fund 42 that we are planning to replace in the 2023 budget. However, the next several years, I think Peggy mentioned earlier, there wasn't such a large number coming, you know, it isn't in the millions of dollars, so we are hoping to do some catch-up in 2023 and 2024.
Are we still optimistic that that vehicle will be available given supply? Or was this one that we got, that I remember hearing, is this being reallocated or?
No, this is one, they actually have been working with the vendor for about 3 months. I know they did just have a price increase on October that it's a 23 item, let's just wait for 23. I think the delta was about $10,000, but they have a lot going on at the fire station right now, so they really didn't have the energy, you know, the manpower to deal with that. So 2023 will be that ambulance, and it is a pretty long lead time, but they do believe they will get it.
All right, so on to.
We have a question, excuse
Oh, I'm
me,
sorry.
And this,
Alderwoman Hanneman.
this is probably it's a very elementary question. I'm not gonna say silly question, but it's an elementary question. Why do we replace the ambulances out of Fund 42, but we replace the police 42, but we replace the police cars out of Fund 41?
It's a good question. So police cars, please don't take any disrespect with this word, police cars are disposable. That's why police cars last 3 years,
Okay.
ambulances
I
last
kind of
much
thought that was the
longer.
reason, but
Yep,
I don't want to assume.
If you read the fine print,
The reason, but
yep.
I don't want to assume.
if you read the fine print, there's parameters on dollar amount and life, and the police cars don't fit the life.
Gotcha.
And if one of them gets smashed up, they don't even last that long. And we went through a barrage of that, knock on wood, we're done with that. I think hopefully we went through a barrage of that, knock on wood, we're done with that. I think hopefully we paid our dues, but we had, I mean, stuff like that comes up, and they're almost to the point where they're just, you know, included every year in their, well, they are every year.
Yeah.
I mean, it's 4 or 5, how many, it's just a matter how many they're ordering every year.
Yeah.
I mean, it's 4 or 5, how many, it's just a matter how many they're ordering. But an excellent question, and it comes up all the time, and you say, well, wait a minute, are we splitting hairs here a little bit? But, you know, it is kind of what it is. They come up with a better mousetrap for a police vehicle, and everybody, what it is. They come up with a better mousetrap for a police vehicle, and everybody could be switching, you know, to that too, who knows? Anything
Okay,
else?
thanks.
Any other questions?
So just again, on the funding for Fund 42, Fund 42 is usually funded through landfill siting fees, is part of our homework for next year when we look at this financial plan, is how we can better fund the equipment replacement fund. The equipment replacement fund has been underfunded for many, many years. It's just not cutting what needs to be done. So we do have some ideas when we get to the street fund. We're gonna talk about yesterday, the 10th. There's approximately $92,000 in there. We do think we're perhaps a little bit conservative on landfill siting. That's gonna be something that we're gonna request that the finance committee take a look at, and perhaps even with year-end funds that might be left, start funding those things a little bit stronger than they have been in the past. Then we're gonna come up on some bigger years, and we just don't wanna be stuck. And I will tell you, we talked to the council about this for the budget presentation, but there's very few communities that do anything besides borrow for equipment and street improvement. We borrow for neither of them right now, which is nothing short of amazing. We want to keep it that way as long as we can, but
I hope council members picked up on that. I mean, there are communities, as we just said, they do nothing but, you know, borrow. We need something, oh, we gotta borrow. This whole concept was that you'd have these big, you know, equipment variations, and assuming they get replaced, just because it goes into that equipment replacement, there's a new mousetrap that developers say, hey, we're doing something different, or we're gonna, move to this, whatever. But it varies so much, and this basically provides an opportunity to provide a down payment, just like kind of the real world operates, businesses, so that as you're spending money and doing capital outlay, you've got, so if we're funding 100% out of it, but, I mean, community has to do nothing but leverage it 100% and put it all on the debt service of the taxpayer. We think there's a better way to do that if you're planning for this stuff. It isn't necessarily a surprise. Fire trucks aren't going to last forever. Ambulance, we have them in the schedule. They're out there. They might get pushed around a year or two, just like the ambulance is pushed from 22 to 23, but they usually don't go away.
Right. So Fund 46, as Peggy mentioned, is, and I won't pretend to know everything that's happening to 2022 projects. I am certainly still coming up to speed in learning those, but I will give you on page 243, or 253, we talk about some of the things that were planned for 2022 and how they're doing. I think facilities throughout all the city buildings, that spending is happening this year, and it will continue to happen. The fiber optic cable project is underway. I believe it is either out to bid or going out to bid. And so that is, a big project that will be spent and hopefully improve all of our experiences. Looking forward to that. Then we have the fire station design. So as we mentioned, that was in last year's budget, and that has been delayed until 2023, but you see it again in this year's budget. Same with the public works design, that has been delayed. The industrial park design, that has been delayed. The industrial park and city park lighting, that is, those are things that DPW will continue to replace. And then the design of the connection to the alternate municipal water supply. There is still continuing ongoing negotiations, and I know Peggy has been intimately involved, and hopefully there'll be a decision sometime in the next 4 to 6 months or so. The water tower on Highway 100, that project. The water tower on Highway 100, that project is getting very close. My last Board of Water Commissioner meeting, I know that they were getting very close to putting that out to bid, so hopefully we'll be hearing more about that. Then the various parks projects, obviously there was a big change. Or at least a big move on the part of the city where they purchased this Southwest Park property. And because of that $1.5 million purchase, there are a number of other things that did not or will not happen in 2022. Those are things like, will not happen in 2022. Those are things like, we had planned for some Southwest Park development. The trailhead at the school property, that was a project that was in the 2022 budget, will not be happening because of the purchase we made. Resurfacing of the tennis court at Fleming Park. Ryan Creek Trail sections, the disc golf, cricket pitch, all of those projects are being deferred into a future budget because of the $1.5 million that was spent. Some of the other things that are still in the works, but maybe haven't had a lot of progress, is the Water Tower Park design, Cascade Trail, Pleasant View Park. That one I know there's quite a bit going on with that, and the spending is occurring. St. Martin's of Tours, and then the 116th Street Trail construction. So those were the large projects from 2022. Now looking at 2023, the facility improvements will be ongoing. We have in the budget the fire station design, and some of the work that would need to take place for that. Part of, or we believe, based on what the architect has shared, in order to get going on that design, the DPW cold storage building would have to take place. We'd need to, be able to move that equipment, maybe start with the site prep and all of that. So that's $1 million. They will continue with some streetlight replacement. And then there are a number of parks and trails that will be planned for in this year. There's some of the projects that you saw in 2022 will continue in 23. St. Martin of Tours, the 116th Street tennis court repairs. I know the city engineer is looking at some different things that we might be able to do to repair the surface, if not replace. There's some land that we have to purchase. The water tower park design will continue. We are looking at a senior fitness court. There was a request to paint the Franklin Town Hall Museum, and then a fitness court as well.
Can I ask for the tennis court repairs? Does that include pickleball courts as well? Is that part of that or no?
No, I don't think it is specifically.
No.
Can I speak to that?
Sure.
And only because I sit on park. And I don't know how DPW staff is prioritizing which courts get finished first, but yes, Lions Legend 2 would be slated at some point for, don't know if that would be this year or the next year. Honestly, $200,000 is going to maybe get us 1.5 courts done. It's incredibly expensive right now. And I have a follow-up, so when you're finished, I would touch upon that even a little bit more. But the new pickleball courts we have are at Pleasant View right now. So people are being asked, okay, go over there if you feel that these courts are unplayable.
Okay, thank you for the
Yep.
explanation.
Question for the parks.
Go ahead, Ed.
What is the model airplane park?
Down on 76th Street, there is an old airport, and the regional local model airplane group flies there, and they are looking for a replacement. I don't believe that anything has been at all promised.
Because it's a county park on
It
Oakland.
is. It is.
So I didn't know why we had budget stuff for.
It was a request that was made to the Parks Commission to find a location, and so that punch list of things that, but I don't think we have that funded anywhere, do we? No, I didn't think so. And I'm like, there really wasn't any.
Yes, it's requested.
Yes,
but it was not funded.
it's requested or sort of a placeholder on the list would like in future park development.
Are they possibly losing that availability at the site they're at now?
I think it's looking at, I don't know if the county's gonna sell that land, but I know there's development planned around that area in there. You know, they've just got, because they had come to us wanting to be able to put up a sort of a steel shelter type thing for when it rains, and that had been denied. And primarily because of flooding that does come up in there. So, but a little bit more, as I see we've got the $20,000 in there for the Frisbee disc golf course. I believe that has been considered for Water Tower Park. I don't see that being complete by the end of 2023. For it yet. So I'm wondering if that money for this next year couldn't move to the tennis court repairs.
Again, might be a timing issue there.
And I understand that the Frisbee disc golf course, that would qualify for park impact fees, whereas if that were moved to the tennis court repairs, we would lose impact fees, whereas if that were moved to the tennis court repairs, we would lose that. But it's not a huge amount, and we're kind of out of the woods with our park impact fees for now, but.
Yeah, we can talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah.
We're in the process of doing an analysis on
Okay.
that.
Alderwoman Hanneman, where is,
Analysis on
Okay.
that.
Alderwoman Hanneman, where is the senior fitness court being proposed to go?
It's considered to be moved to Ernie Lake.
To where?
Ernie Lake,
Okay.
kind of around that perimeter. Kind of around that perimeter.
Other comments or questions? All right, let's move on.
So maybe just really quick before we do, since you just asked about impact fees, if, just an update. So maybe just really quick before we do, since you just asked about impact fees, if, just an update. We know we have to spend about 1.2 million. My most recent calculation is that we're gonna be just under 1.1 million, but the funds actually start to expire in '23 and they expire by month. So we still think there's gonna be some more spending, or by month. So we still think there's gonna be some more spending in 2022. We're just working with the city engineer to get all of that funding in place. But yes, we do think we're gonna be over that hurdle. We just need to make sure that we get over that
Gotcha.
hurdle.
Okay.
And then you can see in the future years, there's quite a few,
Yeah.
I think it was about, in the future years, there's quite a few,
Yeah.
I think it was about 565,000 of park impact fees planned for next year's spending.
It's a great question.
I think we just
I think
did
it-
that a little bit ago.
Yep.
One
Correct.
question for Peggy, if I may. So I'm looking at, question for Peggy, if I may. So I'm looking at like the furniture replacement for the library. Do we have the capability to buy a GSA contract?
We do, absolutely.
Is that typically what we do, or
There's a lot of state contracts that,
is that typically what we do, or?
there's a lot of state contracts that we have access to. So basically, when we talk to the vendors, we just kind of implore them to go look for the best state contract pricing that we can get. But yeah, I think without having a ton of money for everything we do, that's really our best chance at getting good
Yeah,
things.
because the profit is locked into what the guy used to get in the sales end of that. And for the purchaser, it's a pretty good deal.
For sure. And you know, the mayor talked about this purchasing person. That's one of the things, is just making sure we're up on what's going on with all the state contracts and where our best options are and who are the vendors that typically provide those services and things like that, to maybe be an aid to all the departments for that. So that's definitely something we're going to be doing more in the future, but I can tell you, all the department heads are very aware of that contract.
Other questions or comments?
So just one comment, if we could, on the library parking lot replacement. It's a very large initiative. Right now, we have in the plan basically going halves, half city, half library. There's some concern on the library, are going to be meeting with the library director and the board president in the near future. We just want everybody to be very comfortable that we're not going, the plan is not to short the library or anything like that. We just want to make sure that the funds are being adequately used wherever they are. So that one is a little bit up for discussion where we're at on that one.
Okay.
And then the remaining projects reside in the water and sanitary sewer area. That Ryan Road sewer, 76th Street, that's part of the fire hall, DPW. That's something that needs to be. So that's $1.6 million. And then the PPII, those are activities, policies, projects that come forward every year through that program for sanitary sewer. And then obviously, there's plans for the water tower, we alternate water supplier, and then each year they have water extensions and meter replacements and those types of things. So the 256 is just a nice summary, if you will, of everything that's going on in Fund 46. The total projects, sort of, and a grant, and then you can see the number at the top, the borrowing, the $6.3 million. This is where something that, in order to do the fire station and all those other things, there would be a greater amount of borrowing.
Any further questions? It's a pretty nice overview, I think, or snapshot. Not all of this obviously is full set goal, but you can kind of see how some hit the start button, I guess, if I can say it that way.
Yep.
And then Fund 47, maybe just do that one quickly.
All right, and that, as Peggy mentioned right up front with the Street Improvement Fund, there is a very nice, I think Tyler does this analysis on our streets and where they are at and whether they need to be redone. It's, very thorough look, and they continually to ask for additional funding to replace streets and upgrade them, and we are trying to give them a little bit more money this year. So that is why it went from the typical 1 million to $1 million, a little bit more money this year. So that is why it went from the typical 1 million to $1.5 million to fund some additional road improvements.
I see, appreciate that, and I'm a little disappointed that we had to take the 50,000 out of curb and gutter repair for the year.
So we didn't necessarily take it out.
Repair for the year.
So we didn't necessarily take it out. It's in there, it's just all under the 1.5. So they will do the extra curb and gutter, just like they did the ADA work, but it's going to be dependent on the street. So it's not out, it's just not called out be dependent on the street. So it's not out, it's just not called out singularly in the budget.
So they have to use the $1.5 million to do that. So it's part of their additional funding, but.
And how is that being prioritized then?
I believe that'll be engineering staff recommendation. I believe that'll be engineering staff recommendation to council.
There were just a few small projects that you can see that they did, that we did include in addition to the $1.5 million, and that was some, the road construction on Hawthorne and some stream bank stabilization.
And I might have said that backwards. It will likely be council direction to staff. I mean, staff will make the recommendation, but certainly council, if council, wants there to be 75,000 of curbs or whatever that is, council can certainly make those directives.
Project, they want to do the curb at the same time. If it's a few dollars more, a few less, they want to do it all in one project.
Well, they have also done curb repairs in and of itself.
Right.
Singularly, and I don't want to see that particularly stop because we want to spend the money on this bigger, constantly complaining about their falling apart curb that they're driving up and down several times a day.
Yep. The road project, I think, if you read through the detail, and I spent a little bit of time with it, is a system we've used, but I think what you're starting to see is the maturity, the maturation of the streets a little bit in the age of our community. Early on, when developers were building and the roads were all brand new, it was great to go out and rate them, and wow, they turned out 8s and 9s, and everything looked great. Now you're starting to what I would call maturation, and the cycle's starting to come back around on some of these. The other thing that I want staff to keep at least abreast is that if this economy does slow down, as some are anticipating, there may be opportunities for contractors in bidding and pricing that we have not seen in some recent times. That strategy had been used years back, and here again it's laid out. It's not a surprise of what it's not a surprise of what's coming and what it's going to cost and some of the dollars that are needed. And if there's an opportunity where vendors or contractors are looking for work and pricing is aggressive, I don't see the city needing to pause or hesitate on spending 2 years' worth in 1 year. I don't see the city needing to pause or hesitate on spending 2 years' worth in 1 year or moving it up or whatever. I mean, these are just arbitrary 12-month, slices that we put this budget in. If there's an opportunity to do work and it so presents itself, I would do work and it so presents itself, I would like, that to be brought forward and council members to be aware of that as well. Because again, this isn't gonna take care of itself, it's not gonna go away. I mean, it's just a matter of timing and how we split it up. And there will be opportunities, I think, in the marketplace sometimes to use to our advantage. And since most of that is contracted out, I mean, absent some design work and whatever by the DPW, hopefully it's not an extra, than maybe some admin and coordination and so on and so forth. But we'll see how that plays out. Anything else here?
So just to summarize, we have about $19.5 million in the overall.
And those summary pages 227 and 228 lay those out very well. So our next topic, if you will, is TIDS, but we do have pizza if you want to.
Well, there's no point in letting it, you guys are gonna fatten us up here. I don't know if that's part of the strategy.
No, we're getting spoiled. I think we should start having dinners at common council meetings too.
This is a big ask for the committee. The city really understands that.
Why don't we go ahead and that would be my recommendation, take a quick pause, whatever, and then be prepared in 10 or 15 minutes maybe? What is it, almost 5:15 now? So we don't get delayed too long, but does that sound okay with the group?
Yes, sounds fun.
All right, let's go ahead and take a recess. Bean, kind of get going. I know some of us are still, Peggy and Denise for that. That's delicious. But let's go ahead and reconvene and continue to work our way through some of these remaining topics. And I don't have a preference if anybody has a there in the book or however you want.
Well, the next one that's listed on the agenda is the TIDS, so we can go to those. They start on page 300. So we have active districts in the community. There's TID 3 through 8. 3 is actually closing. I did just give you a little visual besides what's in your council packet. These are just some new one-pagers that we're just doing a little test run with. Sometimes it's good to take a look at this, see what's going on. You'll notice with some of the older TIDs, they're all tied out to the audits, past audits, but I didn't go back and put every value and every increment in, etc. I will tell you for TID 3, that was created back in 2005. It was the city's oldest active TID. It had a base value of $173 million. Statutorily going to close in 2025. It is closing in 2022. Council approved closure earlier this year. So basically what happens when an closure is approved, it starts going through a statutory process. The first part of that process is to notify the Department of Revenue. They get everything. First part of that process is to notify the Department of Revenue. They get everything going. Solidify the documents, the timing. They will not certify any increments for the following year, and then it kicks off a 6-month period that an audit needs to be done. Ironically, our audit's due tomorrow, October 12th. Technically, you have a whole year to do it, but the Department of Revenue wants you to do it in the first 6 months, so you don't let it go. And you obviously know the most when it's sooner to the closure. So what you have in front of you is a pretty strong estimate. It's not the audit. We just got the draft audit yesterday. So pretty strong estimate. It's not the audit. We just got the draft audit yesterday. So it's not certainly the draft audit numbers, but it does tie out pretty closely. We do have some debt that's remaining on it after 2022, that $395,850. We will reserve that. Basically in the dollars, we will reserve that basically in the same fund. And then you see the distribution down at the bottom. That's just a little estimate. The distribution is all statutory. So basically, whatever remainder funds you have when a TID closes that aren't obligated for purchases, go back the way they came in from the taxing entities. So that's why you just see a little chart with all the taxing entities on there, and everyone's part of what they paid for each of the 2 years' worth of increment. The 2 recent years, those are the ones that we're basically refunding. That's how that's listed. We're basically refunding. That's how that's listed. So City of Franklin is getting right around $602,000 back. The council has already committed, ironically, 300 and just under 305 for the Southwest Park purchase that we talked about, that $1.5 million park. They thought that would be a good $1.5 million park. They thought that would be a good capital item to spend those funds on. That was approved at the October 4th council meeting. So then there's another $300,000. Again, when we talk about financial planning and what we're going to be looking at for some of our capital items, this is a very good choice. One-time funds, expense type of items. So those will definitely be in our recommendations. But that's just a look at TID 3. TID 4 is the Ascension, we call it the Ascension Hospital TID, Fund 49, Debt Service Fund. In Franklin, there's 2 funds for every Fund 49, Debt Service Fund. In Franklin, there's 2 funds for every TIF. There's basically an operations fund, if you will, a capital fund, as well as a debt service fund. Some communities do 1 fund, some do 2. It's just a little bit extra accounting when you have 2 funds going on. The value in TID 4 is approximately $60 million. Looking at a closure in 2023 for that. The spending period ended in 2020, June of 2020, so there was some work done. I'm not going to lie to you, I'm getting a little nervous about some of that outstanding work right now because we're getting pretty far out from our expenditure period. It was all encumbered, just as it has to be statutorily up in the next month or so, so that we can be on solid ground when we go into closure. The value of TID 3 was approximately I think it was $85 million at closure. I have the number here. Yeah, $85.7 million at closure, and you can kind of see what that looks like. Column, it could have approximately $2 million left. We'll solidify everything at the end of this year, put a closure plan together. It's required to be done before April 15th of 2023, and then there's an adjustment. I will just pop back to TID 3 just because there's a couple other things. The council does, but basically when you have this $85.7 million, it runs through a formula through the Department of Revenue. 1/2 of it automatically goes back to a credit to the taxpayers. That's not a choice. The other 1/2 of it has a value, and that value is $202,100. And that's what $202,000 goes back to the general tax roll. $202,000 can increase your taxes, and obviously with the growth we had this year, we only had 1.34% of growth, which got us about $295,000. Without this $200,000 for the TID closure, which will be an ongoing, it's now without this $200,000 for the TID closure, which will be an ongoing, it's now part of our levy base. Without that, there would have been a lot of things in this budget that we couldn't do. So again, Franklin has so many things going for it. The landfill siting fees, the fact that we're not using our general transportation aids for maintenance. We're using it basically transportation aids for maintenance. We're using it basically for roads. The TID closures, the one we have this year, one we have next year, those are all things that help us so that we don't have to borrow additional funds, things that most communities don't have. So that was just a little aside on that one. Like I said, TID 4 is closing. TID 8 is a little aside on that one. Like I said, TID 4 is closing. TID 8 is overlaying it, but if it's okay, I'm just going to go right along in the packet. TID 5, Ballpark Commons. This is a tough one. This is a really, what I'm going to call a stretch TID. They started in 2016, the TID. They started in 2016, the TID was created. There's a lot of developer contributions. I believe there's about $27.5 million of debt outstanding in this TID that the city took on its credit. So that's a really tough one. In 1/1 of 23, the required value according to the agreement is $112 million. It's an estimate for 23. I do have our assessor working on it, but they weren't able to get back to me today with the final details. But I did add $20 million. Any bold numbers you see on the sheet, those are the things that are actual numbers. Anything that's not bold, those are still estimates. So of course, at 22, their value right now is $57 million. So we do know some things happened, right? The Lux Golf opened in August. They have 2 restaurants inside of there. They did have some more of their office space, medical building type space used up this year. Got about almost 5 million, 4 million, I guess 4.3 million in 2022. And they do have another project going on, the top floor of a building that hopefully is going to proceed pretty soon so that they can get more value. But the bottom line is they just don't have enough land in this TID to do a lot more improvements. So the increment's going to be on 1/1/23, but adding 20 million is pretty generous, I think. We did a little bit of research on Lux. It's kind of a company like Topgolf, which is all over the nation. So we've done some research on that, and I think the 77 million is probably pretty generous. What the TID is short at the end of the, of course, there's going to be some inflation happening, right? Some tax rates sometime that are going to go up and different things like that. But all those negative amounts, the debt has to be paid off by the TID. If that's not paid off by the TID, the developer has to pay shortfall payments. So a normal amount, 2022, normal amount, 2023, normal amount. When we start paying those big debt service payments that are going to happen, if you look in that debt service column, in 2024, our debt payment jumps up from 1.4 million to 2.2. If you look at that delta, that could be the shortfall payment. But I kind of wanted our assessor to come up with some likely values first before we do that. I do have a list of all the improvements they made this year. We have a list of all the permits, et cetera. But we have to keep our eye on this one. This was a really aggressive TID, saying that there was going to be 112 million in, and basing that 27 million of debt on that. It's hard, if you will, is if some of the TIF doesn't perform, there's some developer incentives that happen at the end. Those wouldn't happen, but we still have to pay off this debt. And that is principal and interest. So that's the way TID 5 looks today. I think most of you are familiar with it. The long story short on that is the developer came to us back in March and said they wanted to expand the district to add another property, Rise Commercial. It's a multi-building business incubator type business. And it was really important, well, the property and half of it was in the TID and half of it was out. And by state law, that can't be. So it either had to be a territory addition amendment or a territory subtraction amendment. And the developer really wanted it to be a territory addition. So what the council did at that point was took the opportunity to say to the developer, hey, we got a list of things that we need cleaned up in the development agreement, because that developer, hey, we got a list of things that we need cleaned up in the development agreement, because that development agreement had some issues, let's just say. We were able to do some things like get rid of, they did a bunch of public improvements. We did already a $9 million city geo debt issue on it. Did already a $9 million city geo debt issue on it, but then they have a $3.1 million MRO that they're going to get. We were able to push the interest off on that until January of 2024. We were able to add more administrative costs to the TID because otherwise, basically, the developer would get paid before the city. Otherwise, basically, the developer would get paid before the city did. There was a really, really, really dangerous clause in there called an expansion MRO, which had a lot of exposure to the city, and basically we nailed that down to no more than 1.5 million could be charged to it. So in the original development, more than 1.5 million could be charged to it. So in the original development agreement, there were like 3 areas. The Rhine Meadows, the single-family homes, high-end single-family homes, those were kind of set aside. And then there was what known to be the Strauss, known to be Copart, and one other piece to it. And so what we did is, and to tell you the truth, the developer agreed with these changes because I think he saw some of the writing on the wall. The bottom line is there's 0 vertical construction in that district right now. And the TID started construction in that district right now. And the TID started in 2018, which, again, the developer knows that the city has expectations on that, but they do have a lot of tax assessment guarantees. So there's a tax assessment guarantee with Strauss, there's a tax assessment guarantee with guarantee with Strauss, there's a tax assessment guarantee with Copart. There's a new tax assessment guarantee that the council's actually going to be considering on the 18th for RISE, a $5 million one for RISE. So it's really nice that we get some tax assessment guarantee payments, but we really want development, right? That's why we do these TIDs. Guarantee payments, but we really want development, right? That's why we do these TIDs, is so that we can get development. So with all that said and done, the project plan that was just approved by the Joint Review Board, the Common Council, the Plan Commission, and is going to the Department of Revenue before the end of this month, reduces the project cost by $400,000, and we believe that it's actually reduces the project cost by $400,000, and we believe that it's actually closer to $2 million plus because the previous project plan was understated. So working with Ehlers, we came up with a new project plan. What you see here on this one pager, this is exactly from the project plan. So in the end, we think that the city's going to be much better off. We have some lower obligations and risk on the project. So again, very early in its life. It's only 2018 begin. It doesn't close statutorily until 2039. So we'll keep working on that.
The housing side, I was on a daily or weekly basis, but there were more homes in there than I kind of envisioned.
They do. They've been getting, and you know, we've been hearing things about the economy slowing down with the interest rates peaking and things like that, but I check with inspection services every 2 weeks, and they're still taking out permits, and they're still moving along. So that's kind of the easiest part to do. I mean, it's not. To build houses of that nature are not easy, but when you look at some of the other options, we do think there might be something coming on the big Strauss property in the near future. Hopefully as soon as we know something, we'll certainly pass that along. But for right now, we have residential construction and a bunch of...
And the total debt on that is 6 and 3?
I'm sorry, I need to put that down there. The total debt that we have, the debt service we have outstanding right now today is $9 million. We have another $845,000 built in. Long story short, there was a 1.5 debt issue to extend the water main and sewer on Ryan Road down to where the new condo development is going to be. The city engineer in the spring of this year decided he would rather do it than sub that out to the developer. So we kind of split it in half, you might say. There's now, the city's going to do its, so $845,000 is built into this, as well as the developer at some point, part of that $1.5 million that I told you on the expansion MRO, he will be able to do the sewer and then the private infrastructure, you might call it, within this condominium development. So we have the tax increment, some tax increment coming in. We do believe 1/1/23, that $25 million of value is probably going to be pretty darn close based on what's been going on out there. But anything we don't have, we have the assessment guarantees. I think the Strauss one is $12 million, and then the RISE one will be $5 million. So, you know, he's got $22 million guaranteed by assessment guarantees.
TIF 6, anything further?
So TIF 7, there's actually two you see in your packet, which doesn't look very good. This is basically what we thought it was going to look like. So we guaranteed the developer $15 million in PAYGO. We had another $4.5 million that we borrowed in geodebt. Well, $3 million, and then an internal transfer for another $1.5 million. Long story short, we got really lucky on this one. In 22, Mandel just sold Villa Village. I don't have the official sales price, but I believe it was in the neighborhood of 80+ million. So right now, if you look at it, what we thought, we don't have the recorded value in, but we'll get it in soon. It just sold end of June at the 30 end of June. At the 38 million, you know, you can see how we were going to go down to 2043 before closure. It was getting a little tight, but I just did a quick little run on an 80 million one, and this TID could actually pay itself off now 10 years earlier. Actually pay itself off now 10 years earlier because of that sale. And that's a conservative number because I don't have the estimate on it. But TID 7, definitely one of the stronger TIDs for the city. Not something I think we have to worry about. We do have the PAYGO payments, but We think that we have to worry about, we do have the pay-go payments, but we think that the tax increment we're gonna be getting in is gonna more than cover that, as well as, any other expenses. We are looking right now, the reason you don't see any new debt for TID 8, and we'll talk about that in a minute when we get to TID 8, but the developer, when he sold the property, when Mandel sold the property, they paid back all of the loans, right? So we take the 1.5 million, pay it back to the internal advance, that's fine, but there's still $3 million of public borrowed money out there right now that doesn't have a purpose for it. And what we're trying to do right now is work with bond counsel to see if they're willing, because it's taxable debt, right? So right now is work with bond counsel to see if they're willing, because it's taxable debt, right? So taxable debt, private use on TID 7, private use is what we need it for on TID 8. We need about, ironically, 2.5 million out of the 3 million. So it would be really nice if we didn't have to continue to make those interest payments under the auspices of TID 7 and let TID 8 payments under the auspices of TID 7 and let TID 8 pay for it and actually utilize the money. So that's what we're working on with bond counsel. Taxable debt, usually on tax exempt debt, they're a little more stingy on it, but on taxable debt, there's less reason for them to be stingy. We work with some very conservative bond counsel advisors, so we have some work to do on that, but I've seen it done in the past, and it certainly could be done. So that's our goal, is to try to reuse that, but
Yeah, I think the coupon on that's pretty reasonable.
very much, yeah, and we don't have then we won't have to have new
Issuance
borrowing
costs.
costs, we wouldn't have to go, very much, yeah, and we don't have then we wouldn't have to have new
Issuance
borrowing
costs.
costs, we wouldn't have to go through a formal bond sale, and we don't have to do the record keeping on a whole new issue. It would be simply a matter of 2 or 3 GL transactions, and we could be back on track. So that is what we're hoping for on that one.
And is there a call date on that? Or,
Usually your first call is not sooner than 10 years out.
so
I
we-
don't know the
so
specific
we're-
one on that,
So we've
but-
got a ways to go on
Yeah.
that anyway.
Yeah,
So if we could redeploy it, that would be a win-win, it sounds like.
exactly. And what I failed to mention is there was something called a contingent interest savings clause in the agreement. And honestly, if you would ask Ian Martin from Mandel, he would have never thought this was going to happen. This was like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. But that calculation was actually much higher, more than 2 times what we settled for. But their first offer, we employed SB Freeman to help us do a lot of work on it, and they inched up. They got to about, I think by last December, they were about at 2.3 million, and we just said, no, thank you, we're okay. And council was okay with that. They said, if we can't get, a piece of the win, then we're good holding it just, and they paid us $4 million. So it can't be, it's not free, right? It can't be used for capital projects, but TIDS can do things, right? TIDS can share money with other TIDS in the same districts. TIDS can support other infrastructure needs in its own district. So there's enough things out there that will make sure, in the next few years.
The council members here, I mean, there's 2 sides to these TIFs. I mean, I think the risk going in. Some of them have longevities before you were elected and so on and so forth, maybe even included in the voting and whatever, and some of them as we do. So to have some that have wins in them, it just, helps out, and it's part of the balancing act. So I don't think there's any what's the term I want to use, for any pause on taking those when the opportunity presents them. These developers are in this for risk and return and profit as well. They came out smelling very, very nicely, very quickly. The interest rate market obviously was to their benefit, but that's some of the things basically at that point.
And some of these TIDs, 5, 6, 7, those are monies that we took on ourselves. When we start to talk about TID 8, there's a lot less of that upfront cost other than public infrastructure that the city's willing to take on. We've kind of switched our philosophy a little bit more from full faith to letting the developer do it, take a little bit more of the risk, and if they get the reward, then we'll help them out, right? If they pay us the taxes, then we're able to share it back. So we call that the pay-go model, so we're definitely going in that direction with a lot of new ones. Anything else on TID 7? TID 8, our newest, we call this now, it's officially the business park overlay. We call it the corporate park, created in May of 2020, basically as an overlay to TID number 4. It did have that base value of $49 million. It's going to statutorily close in 2040. It's going to statutorily close in 2041. We have 3 projects going on there pretty strongly. We have Vanguard, a development agreement with Vanguard where they've committed to 335,000 square feet. We have HSA. Oh, I'm sorry. No, they're actually more than that. 235 each. So they're Oh, I'm sorry. No, they're actually more than that. 235 each. So they're 470,000 square feet. HSA is at 271,000 square feet, and Saputo is very close to moving forward. They have their permit stuff in. They're estimated at 335,000 square feet. So over 1.1 million square feet and 35,000 square feet. So over 1.1 million square feet of new improvements. Now, with that said, it's not all great because we have Hickory to put in, right? Hickory, we borrowed money for last November. That one is approximately $3.5 million. We have Elm Road to improve and widen. We're looking at $3.5 million. We have Elm Road to improve and widen. We're looking at, in today's dollars, about $5.5 million on that. We have about $1 million of stormwater we need to put in. And then there were some incentives / assistance given to different businesses, different businesses, Vanguard specifically, and that's the borrowing. Would you give these? There's oh, wait, they already have them. Actually, sorry about that. That debt schedule that I gave you, just that little analysis, that'll kind of show you what it looks like for 2022. So that we're going to borrow. That is now down to $6.745 million. The way that breaks out is that $845,000 that I mentioned for the main extension, water main extension in TID 6. We have $2.5 million in TID 8, the one we're talking about, and that is $1.75 million for the ATC line movement or development incentive for Vanguard, and we did pay that one up front. That was the last one we paid up front, and really it was just a matter of dollars and cents. If we were going to do it as a pay-go, we were agreeing to X amount, and if we were doing it up front, we were agreeing to Y, and Y ended up being a better deal for the city. They are actually having a to show off what they have done with the buildings. So we're in good shape on that. They have a minimum value assessment guarantee or a shortfall required on both HSA. HSA is committed as well. Council just approved that on September 20th. They have a minimum and a maintenance value, so they have to stay over 17 agreement with Saputo. So $6.745 million we're expecting late in 22. Depending on what happens, we can cash flow this, so we don't necessarily need to borrow this money in 22. You know, we've got a lot of things coming up, right? Interest rates, not that great. We have a big election coming up, that great. So we'll see how that goes, work with Ellers, our financial advisors, on our bond offerings and see where that's at. But basically it's $2.5 million for TID 8, $845,000 for TID 6, and about $3.4 million for that new water tower that's going to be bid out. And $4 million for that new water tower that's going to be bid out in the very near future. So that's the debt service that we have listed. Actually, the debt service we have listed in this TID so far is only the debt service that has been taken out, and that's that $3.5 million for Hickory. But this $5 million for Hickory. And then the developer payments I have in the separate column. You know, over time it's about $5.5 million. There's solidified deals in there as well as one pending deal. But for a newer TID, we're not in such bad shape. And don't even look at that 18 point whatever million, because that's just not a real number on about line 5. I'm just looking at it, so I'll get that taken care of. So anyway, that is today. Get that taken care of. So anyway, that is to date. I don't know if there's any questions on that one. So I'd say TID 3, solid closing. TID 4, solid closing. TID 5, we're worried. TID 6, we did some things to impose. TID 7, we're good, and TID 8 just needs a little bit of time.
Which one you said you were about Ballpark Commons, right?
Yeah.
Yes, yes, that's the one that has the biggest gap right now.
But there's probably the most, well, there's pretty strong development probably between, should be coming on, I mean, it should continue to
It
ramp
should.
up.
They have the hotel, Lux Golf's not in there, those 2 restaurants in with the Lux. A little bit, like I said, on the office side, the medical office building
Yeah,
type
Marsh
side.
building.
But I estimated 20 million for
Right.
next year. Even if it doesn't all come on next year, you know, they just don't have a lot of land left to do a lot more there. So we'll see how it goes. We're obviously gonna work with the developer. As soon as I get the numbers from the assessor, that's gonna be my next call, is just to go sit down with them again. We sit down periodically to talk about where the value's at and, what the requirements are, that kind of thing. So we'll stay on that one, but that's probably the biggest one, that money, right? Sometimes it's getting rid of an eyesore, or, there's some more intangibles. It's just that the money is so important that we can't lose sight of it.
Anything further? Any questions, comments? Kids?
Work in progress, but these are kind of what we want to share going forward. Look, there's some things we can definitely expand on, make better in these. I kind of took these, we had a joint review board meeting earlier in September, and we're required 1 time per year to tell the joint review board about the TIDs and where we're at. So we have the TID report that's due to the Department of Revenue every July, but it honestly doesn't tell them much. So this was an attempt to try to tell them a little bit more about what's going on and frame it a little bit better for them. So they love it when TIDs close. All of our taxing entity partners are very happy about TID 3 closing, very happy about TID 4 closing next year. Those are very happy about TID 3 closing, very happy about TID 4 closing next year. Those are the wins, you might say. And the good thing about TID 3 and 4 is, there's some TIDs, you can go through the whole 25, 27-year life, depending on the type of TID, and you can get done, and basically everyone wants to start over. These TIDs have good value. One has 60 million, one has 85. Start over. These TIDs have good value. One has 60 million, one has 85 million. That means those 2, 3, and 4, huge successes.
Yeah. And even 5, I mean, I know it's has some consternation, but you have to remember that was a landfill. But you have to remember that was a landfill. How many communities have put development in and around landfills? Maybe that should tell us something, but, there's good and bad with it. But anyway, can I ask one quick question? Older Park, Corporate Park 60th, the cocoa plant, which building are they going in?
I was so busy with this stuff, I didn't go to the grand opening last week, so I don't know exactly what building they're in. But I can certainly find out for you.
That's not the Harley building, is it?
Okay, so just south.
I was going to say, I got an email on it.
I can find the address for you.
And we don't have to have that dialogue now, but somebody asked me, and why they think I am the knowledge base for all of this stuff or whatever, but, I was just looking at enough, or who's moving around or whatever in there. I mean, it sounds like it's a kind of neat operation.
Definitely. Did you see the Business Journal article?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, because I can certainly send that along. But yeah, it was really excited, and there's been a lot of excitement, our inspection services department thing, and there's a lot of excitement around that. So
Joe
I'm
has a question.
geographically challenged, they will tell you that. Usually I'm always like hopping on GIS. And
So Peg, the business park overlay open house is the 26th, you said?
the Vanguard one, yes.
The Vanguard?
Yep.
All right, is that open to anybody? Can I go to
believe
that?
it is open to the public, yes.
Okay, do you know what time?
1 o'clock?
11 a.m.?
It's 11 to 1.
Okay,
I can send you the reservation link.
okay, cool.
Yes,
Thank
11
you.
to 1. 3617 Oakwood.
All right. Mainly because it's right by my house.
Oh.
I'd like to see it.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of good things. Yeah, I've heard a lot of good things.
That location, I think, should be highly sought after.
For sure. Once we get Hickory in and Elm upgraded, Oak Creek, I talk to Oak Creek all the time, and it just burns them like, you can't believe that elm only goes our way, but sometimes you get lucky. You can't believe that elm only goes our way, but sometimes you get lucky.
All right, moving on.
So we kind of start talking a little bit about that one-page debt summary. I do have, I'm going to just pull it up real quick here. Debt summary, I'm going to just pull it up real quick here. We put our debt schedule right in here. We thought that might just be something good to reference. We have been working with Ellers for quite some time, obviously on our debt issuing and monitoring. They do all of our continuing, they do all of our continuing disclosure for us. And the bottom line is a service that they provide is to maintain all of your debt schedules. So whether we could do a state trust fund loan, we could do whatever, flip it to them, they'll include it in our debt schedule. So that's kind of how we've been going on that. But I think these two charts that are listed on page, that are listed on page 281 in the budget really show a lot. You know, city-wise, we don't have a lot of debt. At the end of '22, we're looking at $5.6 million general obligation debt. Again, a city our size that is able to borrow $271 million that only has 5.6 outstanding about it, but it's the landfill siting. You know, it's good management. You know, good and bad frugalness, but that's where it's at, and so that's really not bad. You can look at our TID debt. It's a little scarier. 48 million at the end of '22, projected to be 47 by the end of '23, and then in '24 is when this helped us to be able to break down things a little bit more on our schedule. You will see $6.5 million of borrowing in you saw it when we looked at the Fund 46. A good, we borrow $2 million by course of business, $2 million. When you have some of these bigger items like the DPW facility or perhaps the fire station, those are going to have to be outside of that $2 million likely. That's what it looks like for 2023. But it's just going to be community decisions all along the way, right? Because we put something in to be approved by, the council who answers to the community and based on what our needs are. But again, the impact fees are the other thing. As I mentioned, the other things we have going on for us. I know people don't love impact fees, but growth pays for growth, and that's really the benefit of having those impact fees in place. So, so the debt schedule just kind of shows us at the end of 2021, anything that we have outstanding in 2022, and then just showing, how much we're making in payments, how much we're taking on in new debt. So if that helps you characterize it a little bit better. You will see in the write-up it talks a lot about everything we have going on, a lot of the stuff we've been talking about with all the TIDs. The story of debt in Franklin is TIDs. And so now we just need to work to balance that a little bit more as we move forward. Page 282, which is the next page of the budget on the debt schedule, again, just shows you it by year. This is not a cumulative effect. This is just each of those years, how much debt was taken out and what was the type. So that's what that looks like. On 283 was the type. So that's what that looks like. On 283, there's nothing to really read out loud, but this is a really good history. This was done for many years as debt was taken on. We left that in there. We're going to keep it in there and keep growing the list just to, this is Franklin's debt story, if you will. This is Franklin's debt story, if you will. And then you'll see our debt schedules, and then...
Peggy?
Yep.
One clarification. On 282, the debt policy imposed by the number one says at least 70% due within 10 years.
Yeah.
Were we slightly below that?
We have not hit that in the last 3 years, actually. So, yes, that was the policy, and that's definitely something that I have 22 here as well. The TID, right, exactly. So the policy should be reviewed on a regular basis anyway. But yeah, I looked back a couple years. In 2022, in the 2022 budget, it said 64% was due within 10 years. We popped up at 1.8. That's a hard ask, to be really honest with you, because we don't take out really long-term debt. Most of our debt is, we take a lot of 10-year debt out for things that aren't, facilities and things like that. 20 years is our max, so to have 70% paid off in 10 years is a pretty, the other limitation that the city has is that 40%, right? So maybe we can finish talking about this one first. But yeah, you are correct, we're not hitting that.
Well, and again, we have to realize that there's a blip in the expansion of 18 and 19 when the two larger borrowings and the improvements came on, so there's kind of a bulge that's going through the system. I'm sure that when this was originally written, it was probably focused more on municipal debt versus a what might be kind of a bulge of.
For what it's worth, the other two criteria are obviously being met. And then the next thing we should probably just mention is we are allowed by, and I put this all in the letter too. I'm not sure if you got a chance to read the letter, but if you flip, you don't necessarily have to flip there, but there's where we outline everything in detail with regard to debt, just because it's so important. It's actually page 3 of the document. There's a header called Managing Debt, and it just walks you through. So the bottom line is statutorily we can borrow 5% of our equalized value. 5%, or 171.1 million is what we could have outstanding at any given time. In the industry, the rule of thumb is 50% or less. Keep it under 50%, and your Moody's and your S&P and Fitch, those they're going to say we're doing a good job. This council, I forgot what year it was, 2020, more than 40% of our, 2% of the 5% or 40%, which is right now about 100 and...
About 103, I think.
135 is what we can do. Oh, wait, sorry, 135 is 108, 108.5. This limit currently 8.5 million.
Oh, yeah.
Was adopted by the council in 2019. So that's where we could be at. We're at 70-ish million, so we're definitely below that. But I will tell you, as with this TID debt outstanding, and as we get some of these needs going with whether it be fire or the fire station or the DPW facility, or whatever the fire station or the DPW facility, or whatever big improvements are coming in the future, we will have to watch that. But I would say it's a good rule of thumb, especially knowing that we're very well respected at 50%. We're not that far from it. So I've worked for cities that have been 60 and 70%. So I've worked for cities that have been 60 and 70% leveraged, and there's not a lot of good options. So as much as we can adhere to something like this, there were good, strong policies put in place for very good reasons, and hopefully we can do what we can to work within those, or adjust them as little as we can.
Yes, go ahead.
Peggy, did you say that there was going to be some debt falling off in 2024?
2024 is when we start to pay the principal on some of the ballpark. 2024 is when we start to pay the principal on some of the ballpark commons debt.
Okay.
So that's, I wouldn't necessarily say falling off, but it gets to be a fair debt payment. We're paying off about $4 million per year.
Okay.
In 22 we paid off 4.3, and 20 million per year.
Okay.
In 22 we paid off 4.3, in 2023 we're paying off just shy of 4 million. And then, but yeah, I was actually just referring to the TID 7 debt, the very first big payment. We don't pay principal until we pay $100,000 in 2024. We had some capitalized interest, which is what's keeping our costs down right now. But then we're going to get into paying what's keeping our costs down right now. But then we're going to get into paying a lot more on that. And then we We do have a balloon payment coming in 2029, but of course, we're gonna deal with that in advance of
Okay.
2029. There's actually a schedule I could create that would just be like this one pager that would show you all the way out. And it might be helpful just to kind of see what that looks like.
Especially, like as you say, as we're contemplating, some big projects coming down the way.
I'll do that. We'll present that at a,
But yes, some of those newer TIFs are kind of reaching that point. Then they will, as you say, have some accelerated or starting to ramp up. Now, unfortunately, we didn't have the benefit of all the development phases with COVID and everything, so that brings about, that will be an ongoing watch.
definitely.
The thing, the one comment I might make to the council members here, as we talk about debt, Franklin is in a very, very favorable position. So through conservative, good planning, should we be more aggressive on development, whatever. I think there's another thing that kind of is a real benefit of that, and it's a term I use, financial flexibility. You don't know what's ahead tomorrow. You don't know necessarily where interest rates are going to be, what the economy, what. We just had a town square, being talked about. Or, there could be another cocoa plant or something, waiting. So financial flexibility, whether it's a government, business, an individual, I think is always, always, always a big attribute to have in your pocket. Gives you choices. When Peggy talked about other communities, 67% of their debt limit, I mean, some of those decisions are made for you because it's just not an option, right? So, for whatever that's worth, maybe it's a little bit more opinion than anything else, but I think it's just, we've got landfill siting, trying to use those judiciously, offsetting some of the borrowings and some of the things, but I mean, I think that financial flexibility, especially going forward, we still have open land. Developers are still gonna come knocking on the door. They're gonna want X, they're gonna want Y, or, whatever. Does the market demand it? Maybe, maybe not. What's kind of around the next turn.
And for what it's worth, I think the city has done a really good job up to this point with that very thing. Keeping its options open, not taking on too much, not, overextending itself or, looking at that big thing, Our council has really good discussions about ethics in the last 2.5 years, but the council has really good insight on that whole thing, and I think they lean on the finance committee a lot to keep them in line too, so.
Well, and some of these now, you can see the blip if you look at, page 282. I mean, there's some TIF, that's out there. And there may be other things that come along, cautiously, optimistic or pause on some things in terms of say, hey, wait, we're not ready for that next bite at this point in time. The land isn't going to run away. The development's still going to be there. But, everyone can't have, their hands in the bank at the same. Yes, go ahead.
If I could just follow up on that, I think the point being, earlier this year when we first saw the presentation about the new fire station project, which was also combined with the DPW garage expansion and remodel, that was going to come in about $27 million. That alone would absorb what I call, coming from I'm a former purchasing agent, I would call it a 31.3 open to borrow is kind of what I calculate we have here with our debt limit. So that would absorb our entire go forward with that full project. And so now we see we've kind of scaled back. Okay, that's not a possibility right now. The fire department being an urgent need to meet the demands of our new development in health and safety. But yeah, we just can't do that full.
For the community, to be honest with you. We've got a lot of feedback on that. I'm sure all of you have too, but I think we knew that we needed to go back to the drawing board on that.
My concern is that I can see a lot of infrastructure needs coming up here in the future, and it's particularly sure that we have ample resources and avenues to address those. You know, I mean, I'm not complaining about my road, but my road's 42 years old and hasn't been touched, and there are older roads than that, and that eventually that stuff has to be taken care of.
Right. And you and I often talk about the maintenance, right? The maintenance that goes along with all of that stuff, not just those capital needs, but on the operating side. And it's a fine line to walk, right? I mean, our community has expectations with regard to taxes and things like that. They also have expectations with regard to taxes and things like that. They also have expectation with regards to services. It's our job to find what that balance is in there.
And I have recently received another complaint about the chip and seal process. And the interesting part about it was, is they said, you know, seal process. And the interesting part about it was, is they said, you know, it's not a cheap place to live, and we accept that, but this is not the level of what we want to accept as what's going forward, so.
Agree. I have several constituents that won't even drive down that road. I took another complaint again. Several constituents that won't even drive down that road. I took another complaint again yesterday, and it's like they're never ending.
Been getting a lot of feedback on that.
Yep, I think you hit the nail on the head. The tax one is difficult though when, you know, they look at it on the head. The tax one is difficult though when, you know, they look at it from a total standpoint, as most of us do when we get it, and what we're talking about here is only 25% of that, you know, total. So, not to pass it on to our brethren, but they have to be aware of what's happening at the other jurisdiction. They have to be aware of what's happening at the other jurisdictions as well, school, county, and MATC.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I was at a strategic planning for the city of Oak Creek as Franklin being one of their business partners. And they were talking about the Oak Creek Franklin School was district business partners. And they were talking about the Oak Creek Franklin School district was there, not the Franklin School District. And they were talking about how horrible Franklin is for taxes. And I said, you know, we were talking about it a little bit and we were kind of jabbing each other. And I just said, you know, the city of Franklin is under $5 per thousand. And they said, what? I mean, theirs is under $5 per thousand. And they said, what? I mean, there's not, I should have brought you, in our tax bill each year, we put the list. In fact, the mayor showed some of those. But we're at, you know, this year we're probably going to be somewhere around $4.40 per thousand. Other similar size, around $4.40 per thousand. Other similar size or larger communities in the area are over $12 per thousand. So yes, Franklin has very nice homes, which is why taxes are more, but it's not the tax rate that's causing it. You can get 3 times the home in Franklin that you can get in any other community. So it's also a bit of that messaging too that sometimes people forget.
Anything else? Let's move on.
Insurance fund, and again, I just got that out to you tonight. That starts on page 323. You know, there's a lot of things that we can and can't do for people. We're not the highest payer in the world when it comes to payroll. We do have a 2P, but as far as health insurance goes, back in 2020, we really took a leap, and we had some really high health insurance costs for our employees and their families compared to all of our neighboring jurisdictions. The Personnel Committee's been doing a lot of work on this. This budget for 2023 for health insurance benefits and dental benefit traders, we're still doing the Nice Healthcare, which is a mobile clinic for our employees. That's totally paid for by the city. The reason it's paid for by the city, and that one on that little chart that I just gave you today on page 323, that about 3/4 of the way down the first column, Nice Healthcare plan costs. This year it only costs us. What that does is that's a paid in full 1-year program for everybody. over 550 medications, any regular physicals, not gender specific, but any regular physicals, chronics, monitoring, just regular like sports physical, MRIs, not MRIs, sorry, x-rays are included, and all blood work is included. So we invested in that 2 years ago, December of 2020, because we're trying to take a bite out of our claim costs. And although it's a bit anecdotal, we do think that's happening for a number of years, about 8 years. So for 2023, we're looking at, 2022 budget was $3,494,000 for expenditures. We are now looking at $3,639,000, which again, I've been talking to a lot of my peers and they're seeing double-digit increases for next year. Keep everything the same. We are going to spend a bit of fund balance, about $51,000, but we have ample fund balance, and that's our idea, is to just spend a little bit down each year, have a soft landing, not a hard landing. And basically, if you read the intro, the first page, 322, 20, all along the years. But for 2023, there's one change, and that's the IRS the qualified high deductible has to be $1,500, $3,000. We had $1,400, $2,800, so it's $100 up, 2 per family. So that's the only change. Share. And we're actually having a lot of retirees. The ironic thing is our retiree claims aren't crazy. So again, that's a positive thing for the city. Any questions on self-insurance?
Yes, go ahead.
You've got 21,100 in miscellaneous costs that you're budgeting for in 2023 that you didn't have this year. I'm just wondering what sort of things those might be.
So those things, it wasn't that we just weren't as good at budgeting last year. They existed. Sometimes we have to pay some COBRA costs. We have it's really just a bunch of small stuff here. I have some details. And you'll kind of see it if you flip through the page. So our section 125, our flex spending, FSA, $1,300, ACA transmittal, transitional, $1,100. We have our third-party administrator that's doing the claims, basically took all of that off finance's plate at the beginning of 22. So all the banking and the recons are happening there, all the check releases, all of that was another $2,700. So really, we're just getting better at budgeting. It's not a change of cost.
Any other questions? I know there was a lot of work put into those changes, and it sounds like they're being effective.
So far, so good, definitely. So the next topic, if there's nothing else on that one, is the tax levy and the tax rate. I know this is always a big one for a lot of our citizens. Sometimes people get to this far in the presentation and then they really stop. So it's kind of interesting. We have a tax decrease essentially every year, which some people will say, well, why does that happen? How does that happen? But basically, when you're doing a revaluation every year, that's really how it works, right? If my property value goes up by 10%, then my tax rate should go down by 10%. Then my tax rate should go down by 10%. That's an inverse relationship that those have. So I was just going to go to a couple slides here that I think are important. So this is just on page 13. This is where we start. We just wanted to give you a page 13. This is where we start. We just wanted to give you a picture of what assessed values look like in the history. We don't have 2022 on. The reason we don't is we aren't going to get our statement of assessment from the Department of Revenue, which includes our manufacturing numbers, until about November 1st. But we know we reevaluate every year, so we're going to be right around. So if I go to the next schedule, this is the Department of Revenue equalized value. That's on page 14, all the way down in the corner. Our 2022 equalized value is 5.4 billion. 2022 equalized value is 5.4 billion. If you'd look at, there was one schedule we had, let me just see if I can find it. Well, this one, this is a good one. The next page, page 15. If you look at our equalized value, now I'm about halfway down on the page, just below the single line and above the double line, about halfway down on the page, just below the single line and above the double line. In 2018 tax year 19 budget, we were at a $4 billion value. We're sitting today at 5.4. Now, somebody might look at that and say, oh, that's all growth. It's not all growth. A lot of it is, right, because you can see the TID district changes and things like that, but we also do a revaluation. It is, right, because you can see the TID district changes and things like that, but we also do a revaluation every year so that we don't have a big hit in any one given year, as well as a big expenditure in one given year. So we do this revaluation every year. But just the fact that our values went from $4 billion, and if I would show you some history from 2007 until about 2017, everybody's values were pretty flat, right? That's when we were going through the recession, and we just weren't seeing a lot. Now we're seeing a lot of growth. Well, as we see that growth in our equalized value go up, we should also see our tax rates go down, which is what you see where it says equalized. I mean, these are a lot of compared to everybody else in the state. The assessed value is how we slice the pie within our own community. That's the difference. And while those two have a relationship to each other and we revalue every year, so they should be close to 100% of each other, there is always a slight differentiation between the two. You can see all the TID value, crazy formulas through the state. So basically we take all of our general tax levy and we collect taxes on everything. We keep track of all of our TIDs in equalized value, because we have a lot of other taxing entities, and so that's how the state makes us do it. So we basically take that and put it in a little corner and put that aside, and then we say, how much do we have? So bottom, that's really where our tax levy is sitting. A 2.2, it's recommended at a 2.22% increase, going from 22.4 million to 22.9 million in 2023 budget. And even though the levy is going up, the tax rate is going down, and that's the very next estimating or guessing on the very bottom line that our tax rates are, that we're going to see on our tax bills is about 440 compared to that 437, 2 pennies. It's going to be somewhere, within those, I'd say 3 cents or something, just because we revalue every year. But so that means that anybody, our average increase in property values this year was about 10%. So that anybody who's under that, anybody who didn't do any improvements to their house, things like that, weren't in a class, sometimes, condos go up, sometimes single families go up, sometimes 2 stories go up versus ranches, different things. But generally speaking, the majority of our citizens will see a reduction. Generally speaking, the majority of our citizens will see a reduction from the city side. I haven't seen any of the levies from the other communities. I know the school district both school districts are working under a referendum right now, so they're higher than they typically would be. I've heard the county is not I've heard the county is not looking at raising. I know MMSD's raising theirs just because they need it for some operation projects they have going on, and I haven't heard anything from MATC. So from what I see so far and what I've been hearing from our taxing partners, we should probably see a pretty stable tax rate for this year. Or I shouldn't say that, a stable tax, not necessarily a tax rate. But when you look at, how much did our levy go up versus how, where did our rate change? The levy limit form go up versus how, where did our rate change? The levy limit form, and I think we included that in your packet. I think it's probably coming on the next page, if I'm not mistaken. Oh, this is just some history. So this just shows a 10-year look at where our tax levy has been, where our assessed rate has been, comparison. But again, assessed tax rate is our internal one. Equalized compares us to the rest of the state. But on our municipal levy form, it's really pretty straightforward. We got, on line 5, we got that increase for our TID closure. On line 6, we get the net new construction. So basically our tax levy could go up. The TID 9, the line 9 adjustment. So it's a long story, but the way debt service works on a tax levy is you can borrow as much as you want. Keep in mind, you have to pay for it, right? So you have to tax your citizens. But we use a $539,000 adjustment for debt service. That's been used for many, many years. It's just, it's used at that level amount so that we can be assured that we're not increasing taxes. Now, what I will tell you is, you hear a lot of communities talk about tax levy problems, right? There's a lot of communities that want the state to change the rules. We don't have that problem. Annual debt service debt payments, I could put even the ones that are for TID and for water and sewer that have abatement sources, we could put all that in here, because all we have to do is we can add it on every year up here on line 3 and then subtract it back off on line 9. So this city could really tax as much as it goal. This city is much more of a no tax increase, so we try to do what we can with growth. Back to Alderman Holfer's comments, we're not always going to be able to do it. There's going to be a point in time where we're going to need to, and I can say, if we do borrow $6.3 million in 2023, that means our debt payment is going to go up, and tax levy pays for debt service. So we're making choices, whether we know it or not, we're making those choices going forward. But this levy limit form, the straight form, how much we get from growth and how much we get from any kind of TID closure or adjustment, that's really the indication of basically what our growth is. So in the table, even though our debt payments are much higher, keeps our taxes not increasing. So I know that's a pretty deep discussion of taxes, but in the end, page 15 is kind of where it's at. This would be 437 and 440 per thousand of value. I did a little calculation. I just grabbed a couple properties. One of them, we have a property, District 1, 416,000 is the value in 2021. It went up 8 points with the new tax rate. I'm using the 439. The taxes are $22 less in 22 than they were in 21 for the local share only. So, and then, of course, if somebody did an addition or something like that, that's going to change it.
The way the state formula works now, I mean, if you don't have any growth, it's you're pretty much.
Right.
What?
Yeah. Yeah,
That's-
for sure.
That's the question I was going to ask. So I'm looking at the landfill expansion adding 30 to 30. So I'm looking at the landfill expansion adding 30 to 35 additional years of that money coming in. Have you ever, I mean, not exactly, but have you ever taken an overall look down the road to how many years of positive growth we may have left? And I realize it depends on the economy and all of those things, but.
So that study was done actually before, so when you do impact fee studies, that's kind of part of that, is how fast is the growth going to happen and what does it look like? So if we watch the impact study, how fast is the growth going to happen and what does it look like? So if we watch the impact studies back from 2002 when they started until now, it was basically saying, back then, we had like this 40-year window. But now we're still saying we have that 40-year window. So, of course, we know the recession hit in 2008, right? And that put us back a little bit. There was a lot of stagnant windows. So, of course, we know the recession hit in 2008, right? And that put us back a little bit. There was a lot of stagnant values, stagnant growth. There was not a lot of growth. So I think on a long-term basis, we're probably talking decades. We have decades. We did a study when we were doing some county park analysis, and we had our GIS guys calculated all the open land, and it was anywhere, depending on if you include parkland, anywhere from 28 to 35%. You mentioned that Oak Creek has a lot of growth to do, not that much growth. I talk with the city administrator in Oak Creek a lot, and we kind of jab each other on different things, and they're getting to their limits quicker than we are. Now that could very well have something to do with a lot of their interchange access, right? They have a lot of access, and they're really building up. But we really haven't done any redevelopment yet either. So there'll be a time when we're not just doing development, but it'll be time for redevelopment. This community's too new for that right now, so it's worth of growth left. But did I ever map it out all the way to 2070? I haven't.
But I think Ed, just to add on to your comment there, the landfill siting fees, if there was a magic crystal ball, if you think about needs while the community's growing, like the fire station, new artillery roads and service and whatever, if there was a magic ball where you could say, well, the landfill siting kind of help us continue to offset and fund some of those things, like we're using them now until we got to a point where that be complete or nearing its end, might be a perfect world. Will that happen? No, but at least as we look at it today, those both seem to be out there for quite some time, and I think puts Franklin in a very unique position. Quite some time, and I think puts Franklin in a very unique position.
But at some point, future administrators and council will be able to recognize things are going to shift, and we need to look at different options when that time comes.
Right. Well, and it's funny, we have that opportunities and threats, those couple. Right. Well, and it's funny, we have that opportunities and threats, those couple pages we have in here, and that's really the reason for that, right? It's to try to carry on some of those longer-term ideas that we all know things are coming, that other people might not know are coming, so that's kind of the idea with that. I don't know who put it in place here, but it was a really good idea. The idea with that. I don't know who put it in place here, but it was a really good idea.
Other comments? Tax rate.
I would just say thank you for all the work, and
Yes.
it's nice to know I can ask an off-the-wall question, and you've already, thank you for all the work, and
Yes.
it's nice to know I can ask an off-the-wall question, and you've already seen a study somewhere, so thank you.
That's what we do.
There's a lot in there.
Yeah, right?
Sitting back going, oh my God, what did you know?
So, I mean, we do have to discuss, how do we go forward with this? I will tell you, we were supposed to have a council meeting, we had it on the agenda since May, but we do have a number of council members that can't make it. So we are not planning for a council meeting on the 13th. We do have a workaround with it. I have been working with our hearing notice that we have to put out is statutory. It basically is this piece of paper that I'm holding in front of you. Statutory hearing notice is a one-page, talks about everything in our general fund, talks about our spending, special revenue, debt service, enterprise funds, impact fees, internal list ready. Any recommendations, and we do need a recommendation from the committee if it's so inclined because of all the updates we gave you tonight. So what happened was when we walked in here last week, we walked in here with the mayor's recommended budget. We typically, in the city of Franklin, when we go to public hearing, we go with, after all of you folks do that, do your review of it. So the pages that we didn't have in originally, they technically aren't in the mayor's recommended budget right now. Denise and I were just kind of going back and forth on how that might look. There's probably too many items to say, this line item changed, that item. Fund updates, utility improvement fund updates, development fund updates, special assessment fund updates, health grant fund revenue updates, and a self-insurance fund update. So what we were thinking is maybe we could, all those pages we gave you tonight, we could give in detail to the council, right? Because we explain to them, through an adjustment sheet what that looks like, and have that be the recommended motion. And then if there's anything else, then that would all get into the hearing notice. So our hearing notice is due on Monday, the day before the council meeting. But I talked to the clerk, and she talked to the people at the South, and it's going to look exactly like this no matter what, as long as we just change a few of the numbers after the fact. Like if council changes something, we can still do that. And if all heck broke loose and we need to pull it, we could definitely do that. It would just be that if we pull it, we couldn't, the council couldn't consider the budget on November 15th. They would have to have a special meeting. If the committee would accept all of the changes that we proposed tonight, and we would be able to put those into the hearing notice, then the council could consider that on Tuesday night, and we could go from there without a special meeting for the council. Because without that, we have to start polling the council to see if we can get basically Monday, and I'm just not sure that's possible.
Ed has a question, I think, then.
how soon would you be able to get it in front of the other council members?
So we actually have, it would just be all the changes we gave you tonight, and then we would just need to formalize that like on an adjustment sheet, getting it in front of the council members by Friday, because it needs to go into the packet.
Yeah, that's a lot for,
So it's a lot, but when you look at what's changing, so for example, so we gave you some sewer fund updates. Sewer fund is an enterprise fund that we actually review the budget and set the rates in February of each year. Fund that we actually review the budget and set the rates in February of each year. So changes in the sewer fund are not critical. We gave you updates to the utility improvement fund and Fund 27, which is the development fee fund, but those were just the updates that are listed already in the capital project. So everybody already knows about the programs and the projects that are happening, capital projects. So everybody already knows about the programs and the projects that are happening. We just put them into the correct format. So there's really no changes on those, except for some interest and things like that. Special assessments, less than $5,000. Health fund revenues, those are all in the council's packet. It's just in the department recommended rather than, those are all in the council's packet. It's just in the department recommended rather than the mayor's recommended. And then the health insurance fund would be a special one, but like I said, that one's being taken up by the personnel committee on Monday and the council on Tuesday, so those are really the changes.
So
But we
you
would
would-
give them all the, we could, so those are really the changes.
So
But we
you
would
would-
give them all the, we could give, here's what we could do, and I wish we would have had time to do this for you as well. We could take all of those sheets, compare the old ones to the new ones, and highlight all of the changes, so they could immediately hone in on what the changes are. And we could include that to our adjustment request sheet, do the adjustment request sheet by fund, and they would be able to see it. We can put by tomorrow morning, we can put all of if this committee recommends them, we can put them all into the budget as finance committee recommended. Once council approves it on Tuesday, we could put it into the budget as part of the proposed budget. Yeah, I mean, if we had 2 hours to sit down right now, we could come up with what those changes are.
well, I would appreciate that. I just want to make sure the other members have ample opportunity to have questions asked and things.
Yep, we can certainly. I don't want to promise tomorrow. By Friday morning for sure. Yes, we do. We have an audit report to get to the state tomorrow, so that would probably be our top priority. But my gut feeling is we can have this put together by end of day tomorrow.
It's like I said, you
At
get
the
it
worst
on,
case, beginning of the day, some midday Thursday.
you get it at 5 o'clock on Friday and there's no one day, then it's difficult.
Yep.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of our other council members are gonna be out of town anyway.
But again, this is probably a little more, well, I shouldn't say maybe form over substance. I mean, part of it is maintaining the timeline to get to publication. It's not putting anything in an approval.
You're absolutely correct. So if the council accepted these changes, they would not be accepting them per se or approving them. They would just be saying they could be part of the budget. Someone could come back at every meeting between now and November 15th. There will be an update the budget item on the council agenda, and that would be the time that we could talk about any council agenda, and that would be the time that we could talk about any of those items. So, yeah, you're right. This is a publication item. I mean, for the most part, there's one thing that's not in the mayor's recommended budget that has to be there for the recommendation, and that's the impact fee revenues. That's really the only one. And that's just because there's one line in revenues. That's really the only one. And that's just because there's one line in the statutes in 6590 that says we have to have them in there. So that would technically be the only one, because the budget, for all of you that were here before, we had a Marquette Avenue change for $750,000 the week before the budget got approved 2 years ago. Avenue change for $750,000 the week before the budget got approved 2 years ago. So that stuff happens all the time. I think the key to it is just to make sure those things happen in a public meeting.
But I think the changes that we talked about, it would behoove us to at least get those in. Behoove us to at least get those in. You said not necessarily term the mayor's recommended, but the proposed budget, so that it's one step closer to being toward that, what will become some type of approved document by middle of November. Type of approved document by middle of November. I see some heads nodding. Any other questions, or?
Do you have a suggested motion, or?
We do. I would think a suggestion to amend the mayor's 2023 recommended budget for the sewer fund, utility improvement fund, development fund, special assessment fund, health grant revenue fund, and self-insurance fund as detailed tonight and attached.
I would make that motion.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second about what term did you have it listed as? Temporarily amended?
Tentatively amend.
Tentatively amended. Do you want tentative in there?
You're just making, this was a word that we used in the past years, but really it's just, you move to make a recommendation to amend. So if that sounds more plausible.
I think so, because I mean, we're
Yeah.
starting out with the mayor's recommended as a base and amending it based on the laundry list that you.
So it says, I move to make a recommendation to amend the mayor's 2023 recommended budget.
I agree to that.
Both, okay, motion maker and second, agree. Any further discussion on the recommend to amend budget for 2020? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. The council will have a recommendation from the finance committee.
So we'll go ahead and get the hearing notice done. We'll also send this to the finance committee as well, because then you can have it in your budget to just compare what the details are.
Yes, I think that would be
Changes.
helpful for the council members if you could highlight those changes.
Yep, absolutely.
Because some of them, as they're reviewing them, and they're quite minor, and if they can go right to it.
Yeah, in fact, when we put it online, maybe we'll even put a little cover recommended by the finance committee.
Is there anything else we have here? So the council meeting will be on Tuesday then next week.
On Tuesday, the 18th, these changes, they'll actually approve the hearing notice as well as the changes, or consider the changes by the finance committee and consider the hearing notice. Then it'll be on the November 1st meeting, and then the November 15th will be the hearing as well as consideration of adoption.
Everybody's okay with that?
Yep.
I think that fits the timeline from what I'm hearing, and Peggy and Denise are monitoring that. Other items. I guess item 5, discussion review changes to date. I think we've done that with the recommended amendments. The dates, actually, we just, I think, finished talking about as well, kind of getting us toward the goal line or touchdown line of November 5th, getting us toward the goal line or touchdown line of November 15th or thereabouts. Clearly, all of this is available for further discussion and deliberation by the council members. I want to thank everybody on the finance committee. I know this is a big document. There's a lot of information here. I think after spending, 3 days, not only in kind of presentations and hearing from the department heads and so forth, you get a pretty good perspective of how the citizens' tax dollars are being employed, spent, and engaged. So, I want to thank everybody for that due diligence. $30 million, give or take, I think, from a general fund. It's quite an operation. And will be getting bigger, I think, as the city can. Yes.
Will we still have our regularly scheduled meeting on the 25th?
Good question. I think we talked about that the other day. We have monthly financials are really the only thing we could come up with that, other than the budget, if you wanted the budgets and send them to you. I mean, we've had a tall ask for you over the last week and a half. We're talking probably darn near. And I don't even know what you did outside of here, but just in meetings, we're talking about, 12 hours. So we're happy to get you the financials. The things we have coming up between now and year end, we want to look at a couple policies. Is there something else that we had on the list? I think those were the big ones. We have 3 very interested parties. I think 3 probably that any of them would do a good job. One or two of them have more experience than the other ones. I don't think there's going to be a wrong choice.
Can you say who they are?
Sure. Drake and Associates is one. They don't necessarily have a lot of municipal, but they have a lot of nonprofit and very large plans, so they're going to be a good choice. Principal merged, so Principal handles our retirement plan. They also have an investment division, and U.S. Bank, who happens to be our servicing bank, but they have a separate, and those two both work with a lot of municipalities, so they have a lot of the similar. So really any one of the 3 I think would be pretty good. They think our policy is very straightforward. They understand. We said quarterly written reports to the committee, in-person committee, in-person annual, and just a touch base on a monthly basis. And all of them are more than happy to do that. And if market conditions dictate, we'll do it more often. But our policy is pretty clear when you think about it more often. But our policy is pretty clear when you think about it from a policy perspective. So yeah, I don't think we can go wrong.
Was there, how was the reception of using all passive investments? Is that, because I suspect a lot of them might be choosing their passive investments. Is that, because I suspect a lot of them might be choosing their own? Or not an issue?
Really
No?
that really wasn't
Didn't
an
care?
issue.
I mean, yeah, it's pretty, I mean, at the end of the day, it's pretty generic if we're going to be playing in that space, spread and whatever. I don't know what the feel of the rest of the committee is. I know that these 2 women have a lot of things on their plate in the next week or 2 also. If it's financial statements only, I would not be adverse to receiving them electronically or holding them over. I mean, I don't know that there's in the last the weeks that are probably going to change dramatically kind of the route of 2022 as it's unfolding. Kind of hard to say that already, but as we start the 4th quarter here, it's increasingly rolling toward that goal line again.
Right. And I will, year-end 22, we're very, very conservative. Many reasons for that. One of them being that we were focusing on 23, but another one, sometimes departments get a little edgy when you start estimating their accounts before year-end, and sometimes it causes actually greater spending. So we just took 22 projection to be much more favorable, and you'll see that in the monthly financials. So I think monthly financials will be a good look.
Well, and I have to believe a good portion of that is, again, is staffing levels, because so much of the budget is payroll and benefits. So if you're fully employed for the full, it doesn't allow that typically.
It's true.
Is everybody okay with that then? Yep. 25th, I mean, I think if we pick it up again, I don't know how it'll affect with the Thanksgiving holiday or where we are date-wise, and we can kind of, how year-end's starting to look.
The 22nd, yep,
Okay, so that's the week of?
yes. Is that okay? Well, I'll tell you what, why don't we do this? Why don't we ask Lisa to poll at the beginning of November
Okay.
and make sure it still works? If it doesn't work for you, we could always go figure something out the week before.
Please also pass along, and I think I can say this for the committee, I know this is a huge undertaking. I continue to be amazed at the quality of information. It keeps on getting better. It's directly responsible to the leadership, but also to the department heads as well. I think they're becoming part of the process. I mean, not everybody gets everything they want. That's the real life, but I think they are sincere and do, the best job with the resources that they're given.
We will do that, thank you.
If not, I think we can.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn. Any further discussions? Hearing none.
Aye.
Everybody in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?